The first time she told me she wanted a divorce, I wasn't shocked. Honestly, I don't even think I felt anything at all. There was no rush of anger, no feeling of betrayal. It was just flat. Like the moment a distant relative calls you to say they're sorry to hear about your loss, but it doesn't even register because you weren't close enough to care. I think that's when I realized something had been missing between us for a long time, but I never had the guts to admit it to myself. I was sitting at the kitchen table when she said it. The phone was in her hand, but she wasn't looking at me, not really. She was staring out the window, tapping her fingers nervously on the ceramic mug she'd been holding. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the tightness in her chest. "I think we need to talk," she said. And I knew. I knew exactly what was coming. I glanced up, trying to read her. But there was nothing to read. She had a mask on, like she had rehearsed this moment 100 times before. I had heard this line too many times, the "we need to talk" one. It was usually about something trivial, something annoying, but nothing that felt this final. "Go ahead," I said. I wasn't looking at her, just stirring my coffee, trying to act casual. I already knew where this conversation was headed, and I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me freak out. "I think we should get a divorce," she said, flatly, without hesitation. "It's just not working anymore." Those were the words. And in that exact moment, I felt something sharp and jagged, but not quite pain. More like a cold realization, an odd kind of detachment. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I just felt tired. I had been watching this slow unraveling for years, and I think I finally gave up on the idea of fixing it. But hearing it out loud, hearing her say it, that hit differently. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask if there was someone else, or what had gone wrong, or any of the questions I should have asked. What's the point? The truth is, I had stopped caring a long time ago. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, a few strands of it falling loose. She had on one of those oversized sweaters she used to wear when we were first together, and I remember thinking for a split second how I used to find it charming. But now it just seemed like she was trying to hold on to something that wasn't there anymore. "Are you sure?" I finally said. My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded like someone else asking a question I had no right to answer. She nodded slowly, like she had been expecting me to ask that. "Yeah, I've been sure for a while now. I didn't want to hurt you, Nate, but I think we both know this isn't working. You don't love me like you used to, and I don't love you like I did." The words cut me, even though I wasn't supposed to feel them. Even though I had already prepared myself for this exact moment, they landed harder than I could have imagined. I didn't say anything for a long time. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock on the wall, which felt louder and louder with each passing second. "I never thought I'd hear those words from you," I finally muttered, more to myself than to her. But she heard me, because she always heard me. She stared at me for a long time, her eyes vacant, like she was watching me from a distance. "You should have seen it coming. I've been checking out for months, maybe even longer." This was just the point where I finally said it out loud. I should have been angry, or confused, or something, but all I could feel was this hollow emptiness inside me. The realization that this was the end. No drama, no tearful breakdowns, just a woman sitting across from me saying that everything we had built was nothing more than a fading memory. "What now?" I asked, trying to find a thread of emotion in my own voice. "Are you going to file right away? Should I get a lawyer?" She paused, and then, as if the conversation wasn't about our lives crumbling apart, she shrugged. "I don't know. I just don't want to waste any more time. I don't know how we got here, but I do know that I'm done." And just like that, I felt the last bit of whatever I had left in this relationship vanish. She wasn't looking at me with anger or resentment. It wasn't like the movies where people scream at each other. There was no fight, no emotional release, no catharsis. It was just an acknowledgement that everything had been eroding for years, and now the rubble was finally starting to show. That was it. But here's where the story changes. Because even though I felt numb, even though I had somehow emotionally detached myself from this whole mess, I wasn't as ready to let go as she thought I was. And I realized then that I hadn't been living my own life for a long time. Not really. I had been living in the shadow of this marriage, pretending things were okay, pretending we were happy. But deep down, I knew I had become someone I didn't recognize anymore. So, when she walked away that night, when she went to bed in our empty room with her back turned to me, I didn't go to sleep. I just stayed there, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember when things had changed, and wondering if I could ever get back to the person I used to be. The thing is, Cecilia had no idea that I wasn't just letting go of our marriage. I was letting go of the version of me I had lost in the process. And that's when I decided something. If she could walk away, then maybe it was time I walked away too. But I wasn't going to walk away empty-handed. The morning after she told me she wanted a divorce, it was like nothing had changed. We both went about our day, like two strangers living in the same house. She made her coffee, I made mine, and we sat at the table in silence. The weight of what had happened wasn't something you could easily ignore, but that's what we did. We ignored it, pretending like nothing had shifted under the surface. It wasn't until much later that I realized how much she had already checked out. How much I had checked out, too, without even realizing it. There had been no fight between us, no passionate arguments or final moments of clarity. Just silence. Cold, unbearable silence that stretched out between us like a canyon. The hours that followed felt like I was living in a fog. I couldn't remember the last time I had truly felt something for her. Was it before the late nights when she came home after I was already asleep? Was it before the conversations started to feel like routine rather than connection? Or had I been losing her long before that? I don't know. But there was something different now. The air between us wasn't just tense, it was suffocating. When she left for work, there was no kiss goodbye, no hug, no usual pleasantries. She just grabbed her things, kissed the dog on the head, and walked out the door. I watched her leave from the window, my hands still shaking from the conversation we'd had the night before. It felt like the final act in a play I hadn't known I was in. I sat down on the couch, replaying her words in my mind. I'm done. The words echoed in my head like a broken record. I had spent so many years convincing myself things were fine, convincing myself that the cracks in our marriage were just temporary, but now they were impossible to ignore. The truth was staring me in the face. This wasn't some misunderstanding or a rough patch. This was the end, and I was the one left holding the pieces. I spent the rest of the morning pacing around the house, trying to figure out what to do with myself. The house felt empty. The silence felt louder than it ever had before. For the first time in what seemed like forever, I felt completely and utterly alone. It was late afternoon before I received a message from her. It was short, simple. Can we talk when I get home? I felt a mix of confusion and dread at the same time. What more was there to say? Hadn't we already talked about everything? But I agreed to wait for her, hoping for some kind of closure or at least some explanation, even though deep down, I knew that this wasn't going to be some fairy tale resolution. When she finally came home, I was sitting at the kitchen table, still trying to make sense of everything. She looked at me for a moment, her face unreadable, and then sat down across from me. I've been thinking about it a lot, she began, her voice softer now. And I feel like I owe you more than just walking away without explanation. I leaned forward, my heart racing, unsure of what to expect. You don't owe me anything, Cecilia. You made your choice. I just don't understand why now. Why after everything? She stared at her hands for a moment, as though unsure of how to continue. I don't want to hurt you, Nate. I really don't. But I've been unhappy for so long, and I never knew how to tell you. I thought I could work through it, that things would get better, but they didn't. And I'm just tired. Her words hit me harder than anything she'd said before. Tired. That's what it came down to. She was tired of pretending. Tired of holding on to something that had stopped working years ago. And now, she was walking away. I felt the anger rising in me, but I pushed it down. What was the point in arguing? What was the point in trying to convince her to stay when it was clear she had already left in her heart? I never saw it coming, I said quietly, staring at her. I thought we were okay. She shook her head. I don't think we ever were. Not really. And maybe it's my fault too. I never told you how bad it had gotten. I never gave you a chance to fix it. I just kept hoping things would get better, but they never did. And that was the hardest part to hear. The part where she admitted she had given up on us long before she actually told me. We sat there in silence for what felt like forever. Neither of us knew what to say next. The conversation had reached its peak, and now there was nothing left to say. She wasn't going to change her mind, and I wasn't going to beg her to stay. I had already given everything I had, and it still wasn't enough. Finally, she stood up, as though she had already made up her mind about the next step. I'm sorry, Nate. I really am. I never wanted to hurt you, but I can't do this anymore. And just like that, she was gone again, physically and emotionally. She walked out of the room, leaving me sitting there, trying to wrap my head around the fact that everything had ended. I had loved her. I had given her everything I could, but it still wasn't enough. And now, the woman I had once built my world around was a stranger to me. That night, I sat in the dark, unable to sleep. I kept thinking about her words. Tired, unhappy, done. And it hit me. I had been living in a fog, too. I had been going through the motions, pretending everything was fine, while all the while, we were both drifting further apart. But Cecilia had the courage to face it, and I had failed to do the same. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if she would file for the divorce right away, or if she would wait for some miraculous change to happen. But I did know one thing. She had no idea what she had just done. She thought she was walking away from a failed marriage. But she didn't realize that by walking away, she had just made a choice that would change everything for both of us. And now, it was my turn to make my move. The days following Cecilia's announcement were some of the longest of my life. It wasn't just the obvious, her leaving, the empty house, the silence that pressed down on me like a weight. It was more than that. It was the feeling of something irrevocable happening. Something so final that it seemed impossible to undo, like the snap of a branch you thought was still strong. But once it breaks, you realize you were wrong all along. I walked around like a ghost, half in denial, half in a fog of confusion. I tried to fill the space with noise, TV, music, even cleaning up around the house, but nothing helped. There was always this gnawing feeling, this anxiety that clawed at my chest. The house was too quiet, my thoughts too loud. I hadn't heard from Cecilia for the next few days after our conversation, and for some reason, that made everything worse. It was the kind of silence that screamed at you, the kind that let you know that the separation was becoming real, that she was already moving on, and I was stuck in limbo. I hadn't realized how much of my life had revolved around her until she wasn't there anymore. I was used to the little things, how she'd leave her shoes by the door, how she'd hum under her breath while making breakfast, how she'd always take the last piece of whatever we were eating and pretend to be annoyed by my protests. All of that was gone now, leaving behind a hollow echo. By the 5th day, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I checked her phone. I don't know what I thought I'd find. Maybe I was looking for answers I wasn't asking for, some sign that there was still a part of her that cared. I wasn't proud of it, but in my desperate attempt to understand what had gone wrong, I picked it up when she wasn't around. I didn't want to invade her privacy, but something told me I needed to know. Something in me screamed that there was more to the story. As soon as I unlocked it, my stomach dropped. I found text messages between her and a man I didn't recognize. Nothing overtly incriminating, but enough to make my blood run cold. The words were lighthearted at first, but the last few messages were different. They were too personal, too intimate. It didn't take long for my mind to make the connection. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Cecilia had someone else. She wasn't just done with our marriage because she was tired or unhappy. No, she had already moved on emotionally long before she decided to talk to me. And that thought, that realization was what truly shattered me. The person I had given everything to, the person I thought I knew better than anyone else, had been lying to my face for months, if not years. She hadn't just checked out of our marriage. She had already checked into someone else's life. I should have been angry. I should have felt betrayal, rage, or even heartache. But instead, I felt numb, almost relieved in a way. At least now I knew the truth. And the truth, no matter how painful, was something I could finally begin to deal with. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the phone, my thoughts spinning in every direction. Eventually, I put it down and sat in silence, trying to collect myself. I wasn't going to confront her just yet. I wasn't ready. The calmness that had settled over me wasn't out of peace. It was out of something darker. A decision had been made in that moment, one I hadn't even consciously acknowledged yet. She had made her choice, and now it was my turn to make mine. The next day, Cecilia came home late from work again. She barely glanced at me when she walked through the door, her face tired and distracted. I could tell she was preparing for another round of silence, the kind where we pretend everything is fine, but both of us know it's not. It's a dance we had been doing for far too long. I didn't even look at her at first. Instead, I was absorbed in the thought of everything I had discovered, how far back this betrayal stretched, how much she had hidden from me. But then, she spoke, her voice soft and hesitant. like she wasn't sure if she wanted to continue the conversation or pretend it never happened. "Nate, we need to talk," she said, almost like she was apologizing for the words she had already said, but I wasn't sure. I didn't answer her right away. Instead, I stood up and walked to the window, pretending to look outside. I wasn't ready to face her yet, not until I had the strength to stand firm in what I was about to do. My mind raced as I tried to keep my composure. Part of me wanted to scream at her, demand to know what the hell she had been doing behind my back. But another part of me, the part that was growing stronger by the second, wanted to remain calm, detached, and to simply let the inevitable happen. Finally, I turned around, meeting her eyes for the first time in what felt like days. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't broken. In that moment, I was just done. I had been living in a lie for so long that it was like a veil had finally lifted. I could see her clearly for the first time. "I know," I said quietly, my voice steady, unwavering. "I know everything, Cecilia." Her face froze, her eyes widening in shock. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, silencing her. "I know about him. I know everything," I repeated, my voice calm, almost too calm. I wasn't going to let her talk her way out of this. She stood there, motionless, as though she was trying to figure out what to say, but I didn't give her the chance. I should have known. I should have seen it. But I didn't. And now I don't care anymore. I could see the panic rising in her eyes, but I didn't care. The rage that had simmered under the surface was gone, replaced by something colder, something that made me realize how much control I had lost in this marriage, and how much I was about to reclaim. "I think it's time we both face the truth," I said. "You're done. I'm done. So let's just make it official." And just like that, everything changed. The mask she had worn for so long fell away, and for the first time in years, I saw Cecilia for who she really was, someone who was willing to throw everything away for a new beginning. But in the process, she had just thrown away the most important thing she had, me. I could feel the calmness inside me growing, spreading through my body. I wasn't the victim anymore. No, I was done being the man who let things happen to him. Now, I was the one making the choice. And I would make sure that she would regret the decision she had made. It was almost surreal, the way everything seemed to unfold from that moment. The calmness I had felt earlier, the detachment, started to morph into something else. It was like I was watching the world from the outside, as though I was no longer the man sitting at the table, staring at the woman who had once been my wife. It felt like I had stepped outside myself and was observing the wreckage of my life through a window. And in that moment, I realized just how much control I had lost over the years. But now, with the truth finally out in the open, I wasn't going to let anything slip through my fingers again. Cecilia didn't know what to say. She opened her mouth a few times, as if searching for the right words, but all that came out were fragmented apologies, little half-hearted defenses. "Nate, I never meant to hurt you," she finally said, her voice trembling slightly. But even as she said it, I could tell she didn't mean it. Not in the way that would make a difference. Not in the way I had once believed her when she'd told me she loved me. I looked at her, still standing there by the door, clearly shaken but not quite ready to face the consequences of her actions. "You never meant to hurt me?" I asked, almost laughing bitterly. "Do you hear yourself, Cecilia? Do you hear how hollow those words sound? Do you think I don't know what's been happening?" She flinched, but she didn't speak. Instead, she just stared at me, her eyes wide, as though she expected me to crumble, to beg her to stay, to tell her that I couldn't live without her. But I wasn't that man anymore. Not the one who had clung to the hope of a perfect marriage, the one who had waited for things to get better. No, I had waited too long already. And now, I wasn't waiting for anything. I stood up slowly, my mind clearer than it had been in a long time. "I think it's time we stop pretending, don't you?" I said, my voice low but unwavering. "You've already made your choice. You've moved on. And I need to move on too." For the first time in what felt like forever, I saw something in her eyes. Fear, regret, confusion, but it was too late for that. She had already crossed the line. There was no turning back for either of us. The quiet, passive man I had been was gone. In his place was someone who had finally decided to take control of his own fate. Are you really going to do this?" she asked, her voice almost pleading. "You're just going to let it go? Let me walk away without even trying to fix it?" I shook my head, stepping closer to her now. "Fix it? How do you fix something that's been broken for so long? You don't even know what you're asking. You had someone else. You've been living a lie, Cecilia. And now you expect me to just forgive you? She took a step back, her eyes wide in disbelief. I couldn't blame her. I had always been the one who put the marriage first, the one who sacrificed my own happiness for the sake of maintaining peace. But all that was over now. This wasn't about salvaging anything anymore. It was about walking away with my dignity intact. I think it's time we make things official, I said, my voice steady as I watched her face crumble. The divorce. You wanted it, remember? You made the decision for both of us. Now let's make it real. Her lips trembled as she took in my words. I don't know what to say, Nate. I never thought you'd actually. I never thought you'd just give up. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by her reaction. Give up? I'm not giving up. I'm moving on. There's a difference. I spent years trying to fix something that wasn't broken, something that was already over. But I don't have the energy for that anymore. There was a long pause. She didn't know what to do, didn't know how to handle this version of me. The man who had once been so dependent on her, the one who had always looked for validation, had disappeared. And in his place was someone who had faced the truth, someone who wasn't afraid to let go. I thought you loved me, she whispered, almost like it was a question. I did love you. But love isn't enough, Cecilia. It never was. Not when there's nothing left to give. And there's nothing left. Not for me. She didn't say anything after that. Instead, she turned away, and I watched her walk out of the room. But this time, something was different. There was no sorrow, no desperation in her steps. She wasn't leaving behind a man who was helpless. She was leaving behind someone who had made peace with the fact that he was better off without her. I didn't follow her, didn't try to beg her to stay. I didn't need to. I had already won. The hardest part was over. I had taken back my power. The rest was just paperwork and logistics. But as I sat back down at the kitchen table, the reality of it all hit me in a way I hadn't expected. There was no triumph, no sense of victory. Only an emptiness that was both painful and freeing at the same time. I had spent so many years running after a version of love that didn't exist anymore. Now, I was finally free of it. But what did freedom even mean when the person you thought you'd grow old with had already moved on to someone else? I didn't have the answer yet. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to keep living in the shadows of a marriage that was long gone. I was going to rebuild on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a future again. It wasn't with her, but it was mine. And that was enough. The days following our conversation felt like a strange blur. Time seemed to stretch and compress all at once, as though I was both moving forward and trapped in the past. I didn't know what to do with myself. On one hand, I had taken control. I had finally stopped pretending that everything was fine and acknowledged the reality of our situation. On the other hand, the empty house, the lack of her presence, and the quiet that now enveloped everything left me feeling hollow. I wasn't used to silence. Cecilia had packed a few more things over the next few days and was staying at a friend's house. She didn't ask for anything, no items of sentimental value, no final arguments or messy discussions about who would take what. It was almost as though she was already mentally checked out before our conversation. She had made the choice to leave, and it was as if she had been preparing herself for this moment far longer than I had realized. I was the one caught off guard, still clinging to the hope that we could salvage what little was left. But I wasn't the only one in this situation, and something inside me told me that I wasn't the only one who would have regrets. It was easy to see her walking away from everything we had built, but I didn't think for a second that the weight of it wouldn't eventually come crashing down on her. It was strange, because for a moment, I didn't even feel anger. Instead, I felt something far more complicated, pity. She had convinced herself that this was the right decision, that a fresh start would give her everything she needed. But from where I stood, I could see things more clearly than she could. She was running away from a relationship, sure, but also from herself. I went through the motions of daily life. I went to work, took care of things around the house, and spent my nights in solitude, the empty space in the bed next to me growing colder with each passing night. I'd never realized how much her presence had filled the room. Her laugh, the sound of her moving around, the way she used to talk about her day, even the little things that irritated me. Without her, everything felt unrecognizable. I couldn't just switch off everything we had built, couldn't erase the years of love and arguments, of growth and failure, of shared history. But I didn't have time to dwell on those thoughts for long. I had a decision to make. A week had passed since that fateful conversation. I hadn't heard from Cecilia much, save for the occasional text asking about paperwork or logistical details for the divorce. She was being civil, polite even, but there was no warmth behind her words, no effort to even pretend she cared. And then, one evening, she called. It was unexpected. I hadn't been expecting her to reach out, but I answered anyway, not knowing what kind of conversation we were about to have. Hey, her voice was tentative, a little shaky. Can we talk? I've been thinking about everything, and I think we need to clear the air. I hesitated for a moment, the temptation to ignore the call creeping in, but part of me wanted to know what she had to say. Sure, I said, keeping my tone neutral. What's on your mind? There was a pause, and when she spoke again, it was quieter, more vulnerable than I had heard in a long time. I don't know how to say this, but I've made a huge mistake. My heart skipped a beat, and for a brief moment, I felt something. Hope, perhaps, but I quickly pushed it down. I couldn't let myself fall back into the same trap of thinking things would magically fix themselves. Cecilia, I said, my voice low but firm. I don't know what you expect me to say right now. You made your choice. You walked away, and I'm not going to beg you to come back. I know, she said quickly. And I'm not asking you to beg. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. I don't think I fully understood how much you meant to me until I left. I thought this new life, this new person, was the answer to everything. But it's not. And now, I see that I was wrong. I've been living in a fantasy, and I've ruined everything. The words hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. I could feel the shift in her voice, the sincerity, but was it too late? Could I even believe her? The woman who had walked away from everything without looking back, who had turned our life into something disposable, was she really coming to me now, asking for forgiveness? Why now, Cecilia? I asked, my voice softening just a bit. Why come to me with this now, after everything? Why didn't you realize sooner? Why didn't you fight for us when I was still here? Her voice wavered, and I could hear the pain in her words. I don't know. I think I was scared. I thought that if I left, I'd be free of all the things that were holding me back. But what I didn't see was that what I was really running from was myself. I thought I could start fresh, that it would fix everything. But it didn't. I was wrong, Nate. And now I'm paying for it. I listened to her for a long moment, unsure of what to say. A part of me wanted to believe her, to embrace the possibility of things turning around, of rebuilding the life we once had. But then another part of me, the part that had been betrayed, the part that had watched her walk away without a second glance, reminded me of the years I'd spent waiting, hoping she would come back to me emotionally, only to realize now that she never truly had. I can't just go back to how things were. I finally said, my voice steady but resolute. I can't pretend everything is okay when it isn't. You made a choice, and I made mine too. I'm not the same person I was when you left, and neither are you. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could feel the weight of the moment between us, the finality of it. And for the first time since everything started unraveling, I felt a sense of clarity, like a door had opened that I didn't even know was there. I understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry. For everything. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. I know you are. But it's too late, Cecilia. We're too far gone. The line went quiet again. Neither of us said anything for a long time, and when she finally spoke, it was with a quiet resignation. I guess we both need to move on then. I didn't say anything to that. There was nothing left to say. The call ended, and I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't heartbroken. I was just done. I had given her everything I had, and now I was taking it all back. And in that moment, I realized that the man I had been before, the one who had begged for her love, the one who had pleaded for her to stay, was gone. That man was a shadow, a distant memory. I had no more space for the past. The future was mine to rebuild, and this time, I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Cecilia, take that from me. In the days that followed, I found myself living in a kind of limbo. The phone calls from Cecilia had stopped, and I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. A part of me expected her to come running back, apologizing, begging for forgiveness. But deep down, I knew that the version of me that had once been willing to give her a second chance was no longer there. She had left. She had made her decision, and I was no longer clinging to the hope that things would somehow magically fix themselves. The weight of our failed marriage hung over me, But there was also a strange sense of peace. I had finally accepted what had happened, and more importantly, I had accepted that I didn't need her to feel whole again. For the first time in what felt like years, I could breathe. It wasn't just the relief of being free of the relationship. It was the freedom to finally face who I had become during all those years of trying to make her happy, of putting her needs before my own. I had buried so much of myself in that marriage, and now that it was over, I felt like I was rediscovering who I truly was. A part of me was scared to face that reality, but another part of me couldn't wait to step into it. I had spent so much of my life trying to please someone else, to fit into a mold that I thought would bring happiness, but all it had done was leave me exhausted and unfulfilled. Now, I had the chance to start over, to rebuild my life on my own terms. But there was a catch. A big one. I had been so focused on Cecilia's betrayal, on her leaving me for someone else, that I hadn't stopped to consider what it meant for me, what I had lost in the process. It wasn't just her leaving me emotionally or physically. It was the complete disintegration of the life we had built together. The house, the future we had planned, the shared dreams, all of it was gone. I wasn't just losing a partner, I was losing a part of myself. And that reality hit me harder than I had anticipated. For a while, I didn't know what to do with all of it. One evening, after a long day at work, I decided to go for a walk. I didn't have a destination in mind, just a need to clear my head. The air was crisp, and the streets were relatively quiet, except for the occasional car passing by. My thoughts, as usual, were all over the place. I thought about the future, about what I wanted out of life now that the weight of the past was starting to lift. But as I turned a corner, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. It was Cecilia. She was standing outside a cafe, laughing with someone. I couldn't make out the face of the person, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what this was. The guy she had been talking to for months. The one who had been the reason for our unraveling. Seeing them together, seeing her laughing in a way I hadn't seen in a long time, twisted something deep inside me. It wasn't jealousy. Not exactly. It was more like a bitter confirmation of everything I had known, but had tried to ignore. She was moving on. She was really moving on. And in that moment, I realized that no matter how much I had tried to rebuild my life, the past would always follow me. Not because of her, but because of the way I had let it all consume me for so long. I stood there, watching them for a few moments, my mind racing with all kinds of emotions. I wasn't angry at her anymore. That ship had sailed long ago. But seeing her so carefree, so at ease with someone else, made me question everything. What had I been fighting for all these years? What was it all worth? I was no longer the man who would have done anything to save our relationship. I was someone different, someone who had finally realized that the battle wasn't just about saving a marriage. It was about saving myself. And that was something I was finally learning to do. After what felt like an eternity, I turned around and walked in the opposite direction, not looking back. I wasn't going to allow myself to get caught up in the past again. Seeing her with him, it hurt, but it was also the wake-up call I needed. The past was behind me. I had nothing left to gain by clinging to it, nothing left to prove. For the next few days, I focused on moving forward. I threw myself into work, but I also made time for myself. I started picking up hobbies I had long neglected, reconnecting with old friends, and taking better care of my physical health. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like I was becoming someone new. Not just someone who had been left behind, but someone who was moving forward with purpose. The pain of losing Cecilia was still there, but it was fading. It wasn't a part of me anymore. And then, out of nowhere, I received a message. It was from her. It had been weeks since we last spoke, and I had made it clear to her that I didn't want anything more to do with our past. I wasn't expecting to hear from her again, especially not after the way she had walked away. But there it was, a message that changed everything. Can we meet? I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I need to talk. I owe you that much. For a moment, I stared at the message, unsure of how to respond. Part of me felt like I had already moved on, like I was past the point of needing any kind of closure from her. But another part of me, the part that had never fully healed, wanted to know what she had to say. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face her again. But after a few hours of thinking, I made a decision. I was done running from the past. I was done pretending that I didn't still have unresolved feelings. If this was the final chapter in our story, then I would face it head on. I agreed to meet her. And as I typed out the response, I couldn't help but wonder, Was this the moment I had been waiting for? Or was it just another chapter of her trying to clean up the mess she had left behind? Only one way to find out. The day I agreed to meet Cecilia again was like any other, and yet, it felt like I was stepping into a different version of my life. My heart pounded harder than it had in weeks. Was I making a mistake? Part of me wanted to just move on completely, to lock away everything that had happened between us and never think about it again. But there was another part of me, smaller but louder, that wondered if this final conversation could offer the closure I had been craving. Was this my chance to lay everything out, to ask the questions that had been burning in the back of my mind? Or would it only bring more confusion, more pain? I arrived at the cafe early, sitting at a table near the window. The sun had just begun to set, casting a warm glow over the city. It felt like the perfect setting for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. The same cafe where we used to go on our first dates, the place where we had laughed over coffee, shared secrets, and talked about the future. Now, the memories felt like they belonged to someone else, a version of me that no longer existed. I tried to calm my nerves, reminding myself that this was for me, not for her. When Cecilia walked in, my breath caught in my chest. She looked different. It wasn't just the way she looked on the outside, though she was still beautiful, but there was something in her eyes, a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. She hesitated at the door for a moment, scanning the room, and then her eyes found mine. She smiled weakly, her expression softening as she walked over to the table. "Hi, Nate," she said, her voice quieter than usual. She sat down across from me, but the space between us felt bigger than it ever had. It wasn't just physical distance. It was emotional, the gulf that had formed between us in the months since she left. "Hi," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel the tension creeping up my spine. "You wanted to talk?" She nodded, her hands clasped together in front of her. For a few moments, neither of us said anything. We just sat there, looking at each other, the weight of everything that had happened between us hanging in the air. I could see that she was struggling with the words. Whatever she had planned to say, it wasn't coming out easily. "I don't really know where to start," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't even know why I called you." "You were the one who asked for this meeting," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "You told me you needed to talk." She looked down at the table for a moment, collecting her thoughts. When she looked back up at me, I saw something I hadn't expected: regret. Deep, raw regret. It was strange to see that in her eyes after everything that had happened, after everything she had done. But it was there. "I don't even know how to apologize for everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hurt you. I destroyed everything we had, and for what? A fantasy? A moment of escape? I thought I was making the right decision, but I was wrong. I can't take it back, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know that I am so sorry, Nate. I never wanted to hurt you." There was so much pain in her voice that it almost made me flinch. For a split second, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to forgive her, to believe that this was a real apology, that she had truly understood the magnitude of what she had done. But I couldn't. Not anymore. She had already crossed that line. "You're right," I said slowly, my voice thick with emotion. "You can't take it back. And I'm not sure forgiveness is something I'm ready to give right now. But I appreciate you saying that." She nodded, her eyes watering slightly. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't even deserve your time." I left. I walked away from everything we built together, and I thought it would be easy. But it hasn't been easy, Nate. I've spent every day regretting it. The sincerity in her voice was undeniable, but I couldn't let myself fall for it again. I couldn't go back to being the man who was willing to let her walk all over me, to be the one who would sacrifice his own happiness for hers. The man I was now, the one sitting across from her, had learned too much about himself, about the value of his own worth, to go back to that place. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about everything," I said, my voice calmer now, but still filled with the weight of what I had been carrying. About what went wrong, about the lies, the betrayal. I won't lie, there was a time when I would have done anything to have things go back to normal, to fix it. But now, I can see clearly. I can see that I've been holding on to something that wasn't real for a long time. I was holding on to the idea of who we were, not who we actually were. Cecilia's face crumpled slightly, and I saw the guilt wash over her again. "I know," she said softly, "and I don't expect things to go back to how they were. I don't expect you to want me back. But I need you to know that I made a mistake. A huge mistake." There it was again, the guilt, the regret. I could see it, but I didn't know how to respond to it. I wasn't sure if it even mattered anymore. What difference did it make if she regretted it now? The damage had already been done. She had already chosen someone else over me, had already made the decision to walk away, and now that she realized the grass wasn't greener, she wanted to come back. But I had changed. I wasn't the same person who had begged her to stay. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I think I needed to hear you say that. I needed to hear that you understand the weight of what you've done. But it's not enough. Not for me. I'm not going to go back, Cecilia. I'm not going to let you back into my life. Not like this. The words stung as they left my mouth, but they felt like a release. For once, I wasn't afraid of losing her. I had already lost her. And now, I was finally letting go. She nodded slowly, her eyes filled with unshed tears. I understand, she whispered, her voice breaking. I really do. I'm sorry, Nate. I'll always be sorry. I didn't say anything after that. There was nothing left to say. The finality of the conversation hung in the air between us, and as I stood up to leave, I felt the weight of everything finally lift. This was the last time I would see her. This was the last time I would have to face the woman who had once been everything to me, but who was now nothing more than a memory. As I walked out of the cafe, the cool air hit my face, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The days following that final meeting with Cecilia felt like the closing of a long chapter. But the strangest thing happened. For the first time in months, I woke up in the morning with a sense of clarity, a sense of purpose that I hadn't had in a long time. I wasn't consumed by the pain of the past anymore. I wasn't weighed down by the guilt, the uncertainty, the regret. I was free. And while the freedom wasn't instant, it wasn't some magical switch that turned on. There was a peace in knowing that I had taken the final step toward letting go. I spent the following weeks focusing on the one person I had neglected for so long, myself. I had always been the type of person who put others first, Cecilia, my friends, even my job, but I had never made time to nurture my own happiness. Now, I was forced to make it a priority. I started running in the mornings, something I used to love but had abandoned over the years. I reconnected with old friends, the ones I hadn't seen because I had been so wrapped up in my own relationship. I even started painting again, something that had always been an outlet for me, but I had stopped doing it because I had convinced myself it wasn't important. The more I focused on myself, the more I realized how much of me had been lost in trying to make someone else happy. I had allowed my own identity to slip away, and now I was slowly putting the pieces back together. And with each passing day, I felt stronger. About a month later, I met someone new. Her name was Rachel. We met through mutual friends at a dinner party, and from the moment we started talking, I felt a spark I hadn't felt in years. She was kind, funny, and most importantly, she was genuine. There was no pretension, no games. Just a real connection. We talked for hours, and when the night ended, I realized I was smiling in a way I hadn't in a long time. I didn't rush into anything. I didn't need to. I was content to take things slow, to get to know her, and, more importantly, to get to know myself again. Rachel didn't remind me of Cecilia. She wasn't a replacement, nor was she the woman I was trying to move on from. She was a new beginning, and in her, I saw a future that wasn't clouded by the mistakes of the past. With her, I didn't feel like I was settling. I felt like I was stepping into a new chapter of my life, one where I could be myself, completely and unapologetically. The more time I spent with Rachel, the more I understood the kind of relationship I had been missing. It wasn't about fixing something that was broken. It was about building something fresh, something built on trust, communication, and respect. I had been so caught up in the past, so focused on what I had lost, that I forgot to see the potential of what was right in front of me. In those quiet moments with Rachel, I finally realized what true happiness meant. It wasn't about holding on to what you think you deserve. It wasn't about finding someone who completed you. It was about finding someone who made you feel whole again, someone who allowed you to grow and evolve without dragging you back into old patterns. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. I wasn't the same person I had been when I was married to Cecilia. I had grown. I had learned. And more than anything, I had learned that true happiness didn't come from holding on to the past. It came from letting go, from embracing change, from allowing yourself to evolve. I never saw the end of my marriage coming. But looking back, I realized that it was exactly what needed to happen. It was a painful journey, but it was one that led me to this moment. A moment where I could finally stand tall, knowing that I had built a life I could be proud of, one step at a time. As I sat in Rachel's apartment one evening, with her laughter filling the space and the warmth of her presence by my side, I knew one thing for certain. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And no matter what happened next, I was ready for it. The last choice had been hard, but it had been the right one. And the future, bright and full of possibility, was finally mine to create.